Hello everyone, welcome back to another of my pool plan videos, and in this video I'll be covering my plans for the upcoming banners featuring both Serah and Mog as the primary featured unit. You can refer to the cropped infographic on the left hand side of the slide to see which events these are, and as always this is derived from the global forecast from thewereotter, and I'll also include a link in the video description to the full global forecast. Before I head into the banners, just a quick look on the past few events and banners and how I did. Since my last video, we now have Neon and Vivi banners that were released, and I really only pulled for Neon. I went in straight with gems, and in total, on top of the free multi-pull they gave us, I had to spend 75,000 gems. But the 75,000 gems gave me two or three copies of her FR, and luckily enough also her BT as well. So overall I was pretty happy there. I could max her out with just a 75,000 gem investment. The secondary banner there was Cloud of Darkness, and I skipped the banner because Cloud of Darkness FR could also be obtained on Neon's banner, and I actually got 3 copies of COD's FR while I was pulling for Neon, so my Cloud of Darkness was already green anyway, and this allowed me to fully build her just by pulling for Neon's gear. Truly, I think that was a good 75,000 gem investment overall. We then have Vivi's event, and there were 2 banners there, the first featuring Vivi and the second featuring Tifa. I already have Tifa fully built with her FR, so this was essentially a free upgrade for me with her force boards being unlocked. As for Vivi, I decided to skip the banner completely. Nothing against Vivi, she's actually a great DPS, it's just I don't feel a strong need to pull for DPS at the current point in time. And while Vivi is probably near the top of the DPS charts in the current meta, we do already have access to other characters who are also similarly sitting at the top of the DPS charts. So really, as far as DPS goes, I'm kinda looking for the next level up. Moving on from Vivi, the first event coming up will be the Spiritus Wall of Illusions Bahamut, featuring the release of Serah's FRBT and a rerun of Sherlotta's FRBT. Both Serah and Sherlotta will also be getting a rework on this event. Serah's rework is absolutely massive for her, since it was quite a long time since she last got her last update. First of all, she received a damage rework across her entire kit, so all her S1, S2, EX and LD got their damage bumped up. Notably also, her utility gets an upgrade as well, where her Wound Plus, which is her S1 I believe, now dispels 2 buffs on all enemies upon use. Her Moonlight Plus, which is her S2, now has a much stronger battery potential when you use that attack. Beyond the damage, her LD also gets an upgrade where it now gives you 1 free skill use on her next turn when you use her LD, and the LD buff also now has a lower requirement. In the past, it requires you to have 6 debuffs on the enemies, and that requirement has been reduced from 6 to 4 debuffs now, making it much easier and essentially, I guess, almost guaranteed. As long as the enemies isn't immune to debuffs, you should be always hitting this requirement with Serah in the party. She will now start battle with her generic attack up and max brave up buffs at the start, and her EX auras are also bumped up. On top of the upgrade on her auras and support, which is actually really top tier at this point in the game, she also gets a newly released BT weapon. Her BT aura has a stacking mechanic, I guess in a way somewhat similar to Bard's. It caps out at 3 stacks, and you will increase the stacks by 1 each time Serah debuffs an enemy. The potencies of a BT aura increases based on the number of stacks. At a maximum 3 stacks, you get a whopping plus 40% HP damage up, plus 30% HP damage cap up, Brave gains plus 60%, obtain Brave Overflow plus 40%, which gels well with her battery utility in her role, and you will also be recovering 30% of your HP damage dealt in Brave anytime you attack an enemy. In case this wasn't enough, her BT aura also unlocks a follow-up attack for Serah. This attack will be triggered each time Serah attacks an enemy, and on top of the damage you get from her attacks, you will now get an additional 3 HP dumps, which will equal in damage to her max brave cap. Importantly, these follow-up attacks will also not expand her brave, which means she actually retains her brave at the end of her turn. Finally, Serah gets a new force weapon. Upon use, her force attack will also battery the entire party, I believe for 100% of your max brave stat. Her FR conditionals are actually pretty interesting. For one thing, you get a plus 5% per debuff when you attack a debuff enemy, and since the debuffs cap out at a maximum potential of 8, this means that you could potentially get a maximum plus 40% just from attacking the enemy. On top of this, you also get plus 20% if you battery another party member during your turn. And if Serah is the one that is battering the party member, you get another plus 20% on top of that. This means that on Serah's turn, you could potentially get a maximum of plus 80%, fulfilling all 3 conditionals, and if the enemy has 8 debuffs. Otherwise, on another party member's turn, you could get a maximum of plus 60%. Her FR also has a party-wide aura effect, where it increases all brave gains by plus 20%, and it also allows every party member to gain brave after every HP attack that they do, to a maximum of 10% of the damage dealt. Make no mistake, with all these increases and buffs, I think Serah is now one of, I guess, the top aura bot supports in the game, because the amount of auras that she gives is really very strong, combined with the fact that she now gets additional auras through her BT weapon as well. Her FR conditional isn't too bad. With her in the party, it shouldn't be too difficult getting many debuffs on the enemies. However, for the force conditional that requires you to battery an ally, do take note that battering yourself does not count. You do need to battery another party member on the attack to fulfill the plus 20% conditional. Even though she is primarily a support character with utility, her damage is actually pretty good as well, based on the virtue that she now gets 3 additional HP dumps just by having her BT aura up. If you properly build around Serah, and assuming she is fully built with a BT and FR weapon, you could see huge damage by going into BT plus, force time with her, and then going into BT mode and attacking every single turn in BT mode. Because in that scenario, you get the plus 80% force conditionals, and since her BT aura is up, you get all her auras, and you get the additional 3 HP dumps after every attack that she does. That being said, the one thing holding her back as a good source of damage is the fact that she's a bow weapon user, and there's not a lot of people carrying bow ultimate weapons. Something to consider about, but even if you don't want to use her as a main DPS, she functions still really well as a support character. The next character getting a rework here is Sherlotta. Sherlotta's rework isn't as massive as Serah, since her update wasn't too long ago. The good thing about Sherlotta now is that she actually starts the battle with 3 uses of Chuck Staffs immediately. In the past, you had to use LD to gain access to Chuck Staff. Overall, this is actually really good. Her S2, LD and Chuck Staff damage is also bumped up a little bit more. And she now has an additional force conditional, where you also get a plus 20% when you use a magic attack. Sherlotta is still pretty decent as an aura bot support, and the one thing that she truly excels in, more so than any other character in the game, is that she's, in my opinion, really the queen of brave gains. As long as you have Sherlotta and her BT aura in your party, you don't really have to worry about the brave damage that you do, because no matter what, you already brave gain through it all, and you will still be able to output consistent and usually maximum HP damage. Overall though, I think unfortunately Sherlotta's time to shine has passed, she is still very decent and definitely still very usable in today's standards. When I say her time has passed, what I really mean is that there exist now alternative ways to cap out your damage. So for example, we recently have access to Neon, and Neon allows everyone to hit for rainbow damage as long as you fulfill her conditionals, which means that in fights that greatly resist brave damage or has very tanky defenses, for example, in the past Sherlotta was one way to get around that, but now Neon provides a very viable alternative strategy as well. On top of all this, we also have Quina coming up very soon, in 2 months time if I'm not mistaken, and Quina has the ability to allow you to output maximum HP damage regardless of how much brave that you have, and that is also another alternative way to dish out damage. On the basis of the fact that there are now multiple options, and of course on this event we also have Serah, and Serah herself is also a great brave battery for the party, Sherlotta really faces very stiff competition in terms of batterying your entire party and dishing out maximum damage. Overall, my plans here is to use tickets mainly for Serah FR. I'm not really sure whether I want to chase a BT weapon or not at this stage, mainly because I'm a bit low on BT ingots, and I don't really plan on using Serah a whole lot. The reason why I wanted to go in with tickets is because Vivi's event, for some reason they gave us 330 tickets to claim in the co-op shop, and I can't claim any of them because I'm ticket capped. So I'm planning to throw my tickets here so that I could redeem my tickets in Vivi's co-op shop when this event hits. We do also get a couple of free multi-draws as well. So overall, my hope is that the free multi-draws plus the 300-400 tickets that I'm planning to throw here will net me a decent yield for Serah. And I think using her on this event makes the overall grind much easier, and she is also one of the key units for the ticket mission in Spiritus World of Illusions Bahamut stage. One quick mention, in the last DFFOO stream, and this is the slide that was presented, they did announce a GL exclusive event, which is the whatever event, and there's not a lot of info that's been announced for this event beyond the picture of the event right here on the slide. It is very likely that we will get Squall and his update here, given the title of the event and the fact that the JP version of the game actually had Squall roughly around this time as well on a side banner. However, because there isn't any official announcement yet on what the banners will look like or who the featured characters will be, for this video I will not mention anything on this event. Rather, when this event drops, I will be making a separate video for that, so do check it out when it is released. Next up is Mog's intersecting wheels, and Mog will get a rework on this event. First off, his S1, which is jump and serial jump, will get a rework where when it is in the jump version, it will be instant and free turn. On top of this, his S2, EX and LD damage will also get bumped up to be more in line with the current meta. One huge rework comes in the form of his follow-up attacks. Mog normally has two different follow-up attacks depending on whether or not your party members are debuffed. If you are debuffed, he will use El Nino Plus, and in that case, this time it will now cleanse 3 debuffs, where in the past it used to cleanse only up to 2 debuffs. If you are not debuffed at all, he will actually use Plasma Plus as a follow-up instead of El Nino. Plasma Plus has the chance to land a confused debuff, which is similar to a paralyzed debuff in terms of function. They've bumped up the confused rate on Plasma Plus. I'm not so sure how high it is now. If I'm not mistaken, in the past, before the rework, it used to be 15%, so it should be somewhat higher now. Regardless of which follow-up attack he uses, both of them now comes with 50% splash as well, which is very welcome. Mog gets a new BT weapon on this event, and his BT aura provides a nice Putty Water enchant, 50% brave damage cap up, and 30% HP damage cap up. Importantly, his BT aura allows him to do his follow-up attack twice each turn. And this has a lot of implications beyond the obvious boost in damage because he's doing the attack twice. This means that El Nino can now cleanse up to 6 debuffs, for example, because it's done twice, and Plasma Blast has twice the chance to land Confuse, again on the virtue that it is now executed twice. On top of this, Mog gets a new force weapon, and to me the main attractiveness of this is that his force attack now has an AoE 2-turn Confuse when you use it, and since Mog has access to Force Echoes on this event, this means that his Echo ability would also land 2-turn Confuse when it is used. His Force conditionals isn't too bad. I think the most restrictive is the first, which requires you to use a range attack during your turn, and that gives you plus 20%. So you may need to team build a little bit, unless you're doing something like going into his BT plus and BT mode, in which case the first conditional shouldn't be an issue. The rest of the conditionals are actually pretty easy to meet. The second one is if you take an action when you have no debuffs up, you get plus 20%, and since Mog can reliably cleanse your debuffs, then this isn't an issue. The third conditional is if you were to attack a disabled enemy during your turn, and this could be anything such as HP Silence or Paralyze or Confuse, then you get plus 30% to the Force bonus as well. On top of all this, during Mog's Force time, Mog's debuff success rate is doubled, and this is really insane because now with his BT plus aura, with his Force time as well, his BT plus doubles the rate of Confuse, and his Force time doubles that additionally. So in total, if his BT and his Force time is up, his chances of landing Confuse is actually quadrupled. During Mog's Force time, anytime any party member starts their turn, they will also auto-cleanse 1 debuff at the start of their turn, and this at least makes it much more easier to meet the second Force conditional as well. Now there is a secondary banner here featuring Kain as the main character, but from what I can tell, Kain will not get a rework on this banner. I don't even think he gets access to Force boards, but I'm not too sure on that. Is Kain worthy to chase? He's still one of the better often damage dealers because there's not many often damage that can trigger no matter what action that you take. Most of them requires you to actually attack the enemy, and Kain is one of the few that gets triggered even if you do something like an instant turn ability or an additional ability or a call ability. It doesn't really matter what you do, Kain's Lancet will still trigger. He is still okay from that regards, and at least the one thing good about him is that if you want to chase after him, you don't really need his Force weapon. In fact, his Force weapon is outright terrible. I think just getting his LD and BT plus is really good enough. However, the rest of his banner mates are not really very good. Irvine is really bad, and Sars I guess maybe has some function as a call ability now. He will get better later on, but as of now, his secondary banner mates aren't really very interesting. The same actually goes for Mog's banner as well. You have Fang and King there, and both of them aren't terribly exciting as well. Overall, Mog's kit is actually pretty solid. It's nothing bad about his kit or anything. He does very decent damage with his double follow-up. The fact that his Force time allows him to double the rate of his success of his debuffs are very interesting. The dilemma that I have though is that there's really not a lot of need for his utility. For example, landing Confuse, sure it's nice and all, but in many stages nowadays, you can really just blow up the stage or kill the bosses before they do anything. And in fact, that's usually my preferred playstyle anyway, so there's really not a lot of need for Confuse. The same goes for his party-wide cleansing as well. In theory, yes, it's very nice to have, but really, the question is how many fights do you need to continuously cleanse debuffs? In a lot of fights, if you do need to cleanse debuffs, it's usually just once or twice is sufficient, and you nowadays have call abilities that can do that. On top of this, we also have characters that can provide outright debuff immunity as well, one of which will be Ares, and she will be coming back in the near future as well. It is a useful utility to have if the debuffs are guaranteed hit, but let's be honest, there aren't a lot of stages that will feature this, making Mog's utility somewhat of a niche utility. when you really need it based on the stage, then he really shines a lot. But most of the time in other stages, you won't need to go that far and use him, and there are many other options available. If you do like Mog, however, there's really nothing wrong against his kit. His damage is actually pretty good. It's not going to break the top tier damage charts or anything, but with his double follow-up attack and the fact that the damage across his kit has been updated, he will do still fairly well. As for me, coming to this event, it's likely going to be a skip. I say this because the GL exclusive event will be before this, and usually in GL exclusive events the banners are very good, and it is very likely that I will be pulling on that banner, which means that when this event rolls around, I might want to start saving resource again. That being said, it's not a certainty. For example, if I get really lucky on Serah's event and the GL exclusive event, and I still have a lot of resources left, then I may still pull for this banner. But between the two, I think it's just a little bit more likely that I will be actually skipping Mog altogether. On this part of the banner, I'll be giving my opinion on which characters that you could potentially try to go for if you are low on resources and you need to prioritize. As always, I'll be splitting these characters into two categories: good value, which are characters that regardless of who else you already have in your roster, you should probably still try to pull for them on the virtue of how good they are, and the role fulfillment category, which are characters that are probably pretty good, but you may or may not need them depending on who else you already have in your roster. One big disclaimer is that I did not include any character from the whatever event, because at this point of this video, there's still no announcement of what characters those are, and I don't want to put in speculation here. So again, I'll be covering that event and banner when it actually releases. Across Serah and Mog event, first off, for Serah and Mog, I have been thinking a lot about this, and for Serah, it's a bit of a dilemma for me. If at one point I was putting her under the good value category, but in others I put her in the role fulfillment. Ultimately though, I think while she is pretty good and all, and she will serve you fairly well in her own event, she doesn't really sort of break the meta, or become like the top pick in every single party after her release. And on that virtue, I think I'm thinking of the fact also that there's a lot of party comps that you can do that you don't need to bring Serah in, and the fact that for us in GL we also have Penelo, which is another top tier aura bot support. I think for Serah, ultimately, while she sits really at the top of the role fulfillment category, I think it's really just a choice depending on whether you need sort of her role and utility in your roster or not. Right after her, I place Mog. And Mog, I think, it has a lot of the same reasons as Serah. On paper, his kit looks really interesting, but Mog is a little bit more niche in his utility because there really isn't going to be a lot of fights that you need to continuously cleanse debuffs or you need to continuously confuse the enemies. So if you want to pull for him just to have access to that utility in the back of your pocket, that's also very well and fine, but that really depends a lot on your resources and whether you want to do something like that, or whether you have or have not have other characters in your roster that can do similar things as Mog. So I think he really fits well into the role fulfillment category. Further down the line, we have Kain and Sherlotta. Kain, I'm a little bit biased here because I really like having often damage in my party, and I think the Shinryu era is the era where often damage shines as well. And up till today, Kain is still one of the better often damage dealers. However, he's no longer really sort of sitting at the top of the throne on this, because there is now a variety of characters that can also do often damage. So if you really need someone to fulfill this need in your roster, then by all means Kain is still a viable choice. But if you feel pretty comfortable with your roster and you don't need another often damage dealer, then you can actually make do without Kain. Last up is Sherlotta, and she almost made it out of the list, to be honest. Sherlotta is still sort of top tier in Brave Gains, but really I think it's sort of a little bit overkill in Brave Gains where she's concerned. I don't really think you need that strong an aura just focusing on Brave Gains. And characters like Serah or Penelo is probably enough. And at least the other characters offer something beyond what Sherlotta can offer as well, such as stronger auras beyond Brave Gains or other utility that Sherlotta doesn't have. However, Sherlotta is also still a very competent force gauge charger, and this is something that Serah doesn't have. So overall, I would say, don't count Sherlotta out of the game completely, but unless, I think, if you're really desperate for another support character that can charge a force gauge, then I think you might not want to bother with Sherlotta at all. This brings me to the end of this video. It's a bit of a long video this time, but in any case, in summary, I plan to throw tickets for Serah's FR. I'm a little bit unsure about Mog at this point on the stage, but I'm probably skipping him. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the content, as always, do leave a like, comment and subscribe. It really helps a lot. Till then, I'll see you guys in the next pool plan video. Bye!